Andy worked as a developer, also working on historic restoration and preservation projects for 20 years. So he really knows what we're all about, and he really understands in a very deep way these issues and how they relate to planning and architecture. He's in his second term in office, and he squeezed through last spring with a 78% vote. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mayor of the City of Austin, Wynn.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to come speak to y'all. If I can just do it quickly, Harvey, because I like this stuff, is to give you a quick context of where we are as a city right now. I know I'm preaching to the proverbial choir. You all know this stuff very well, but real quickly. The city of Austin is now about 280 square miles. It's 715,000 people. We're the 16th largest city in the U.S. now. As a city, Austin is bigger, more populated than Boston, Washington, D.C., than Denver, than Seattle. Austin, Texas is now 50% bigger than Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia, I was in Atlanta University with Mayor Franklin. Atlanta, Georgia has 440,000 people. It's the 43rd largest city in the country. We're 50% bigger than that. I say that around town. It's funny, half the people I say that to will shake their head. No, we're not bigger than Atlanta. We're bigger than Seattle. Yes, we are. Because we don't feel that big necessarily. And I think that's a good sign. I think we have a remarkable high quality of life in this town. We have, we're the youngest, so there are 40 cities in the U.S. that have more than 500,000 people. Atlanta's not one of them. But there are 40 big cities in the U.S. Austin is far away, almost 5 full years median age, the youngest big city in the country. We are the second or third most educated big city in the country, depending on how you measure it. Depending on what crimes you look into the violent crime stats, we are the safest big city in the country. We're far and away the fastest growing big city in the country. In the 1990 census, we were the 27th largest city. By the 2000 census, we're already 18th largest city. Now we're already the 16th largest city. Far and away the fastest growing of the big cities. Many of the big cities in the U.S. aren't growing at all. In fact, we're declining in population. We're doubling in population every 20 years. So as a composite, we're the youngest, most educated, safest, fastest growing big city in the country. And what that means is you have to be very judicious about how you invest in your future. And the way most cities do that, and most local governments, counties, school districts, and others, the way you invest in your future is with debt. And you do that with bonds. You go to Wall Street and you have to sort of figure out what your debt capacity is on an annual basis, how much debt service you can carry. And you go sell bonds in a very judicious way to then invest in your future. And so we only do this about every 6, 8, even 10 years. We in Austin haven't had a zero obligation bond collection like this since 1998. So it's been 8 years since we've asked voters to help us as policymakers decide what our capital investment priority and strategy should be over the next 5, 6, 8, 10 years. Since 1998, in the 8 years since we've had an election like this, Austin has grown 125,000 people in population. We're probably, through annexation and just development growth, we're probably 50 square miles larger geographically than we were in 1998. And so it's time to invest. And hopefully, most people just recognize that, either because they feel it in traffic, or they're concerned about environmental protection, or they see what had been a renowned parks system perhaps fraying on the edges with a lack of investment and more people using the park system. Probably see it in urban drainage, and flooding, and just things like that. So I think intuitively most citizens recognize, okay, yes, we need to invest in infrastructure as we continue to grow. And so the way we went about doing that in Austin is very Austin to be currently democratic sometimes, democratic a little bit. And so we took about 2 years in the classic sort of Austin format and we formed a citizen advisory committee. And actually, I called for this to occur back in December of 2004. And so we appointed 21 citizens, similar to how we did it in 1998. 21 citizens to take a bunch of testimony, to work with city staff. City staff, admittedly, our planners and our engineers, our cops, they already had strong opinions as to what we needed to do. They knew where our worst street flooding was because of the crummy, undersized, and under-maintained storm sewers. They know where the most dangerous intersections are. They know which of our swimming pools are still literally the drain and fill swimming pools, those that have filter systems. They know which of our buildings are in desperate need of major renovation or soon to collapse. So staff has this big, long laundry list of needs that we have as just an organization. So they sort of presented that to the Citizen Bond Advisory Committee. But then that same committee also took a lot of testimony and input from just sort of advocacy groups and points all across the city. Literally had meetings north, south, east, and west. Somebody probably has the stat, but I'm sure it was thousands and thousands of individual testimonial hours from citizens and groups around town. We had environmental advocates and parks advocates talking about the need to buy more land, either for open space or wildlife protection or endangered species habitat or just outdoor recreation. You had public safety advocates talking about we need to have, as we continue to grow geographically from a population standpoint, we need to have 2 more fire stations, 3 more EMS stations, and another police substation. Then you had transportation advocates just talking about the obvious Achilles heel we have in this town is the lack of mobility, both the lack of effective mass transit and poorly designed, poorly utilized existing urban highways. So you had transportation advocates talking about that. And so the big challenge is the classic exercise and forced trade-offs. Is, okay, we're going to have inevitably a limited amount of financial resources. We only have so much money, we can only borrow so much money. And predictably, the needs far outweigh our resources to deal with it. And so we took about 2 years worth of testimony, actually about 15 months worth of testimony, and a bunch of analysis. And by the way, we don't just do this in a vacuum. We have, all cities have, third-party financial consultants, professional men and women who do nothing but help cities come up with their financial policies, work with the bond rating agencies when it comes to rating our bonds, and helping us understand just the math and dynamic of how much money could we afford to borrow. And so you mix all that together and you come up with recommendations to the City Council, which came last spring. And so our Citizen Bond Advisory Committee came to us with their suggestion as to how they would spend. In fact, we had asked them to do it in increments of probably $50 million. So we sort of have a $500,000, wish list, 550, 600, 650, 700 even. But then we would have to sit down and do the math with our financial consultants and say, okay, what does that mean to the average taxpayer, the average homeowner, in property taxes, which is how much of this debt ultimately gets paid back over the next 30 years. And so then the council had the toughest decision, that is weighing all those factors and taking what we think are the priorities of the citizenry, sort of the priorities of our staff who try to deliver on these services on a daily basis, all in the context of how much we can afford. So, as pointed out earlier, we came up with 7 different bond propositions, totaling $567 million. And I'll go through them quickly in a second. I'll back up a little bit. So there's very sound state law, by the way, about how cities can go about asking their voters and taxpayers, permission to go borrow and spend a lot of money over the next 10 years. For instance, there are some things that inevitably taxpayers are probably more willing to say saying yes to. Every time we put a transportation project on the ballot, particularly roads, people are so fed up about being stuck in traffic, they seemingly always vote yes for road projects. Well, knowing that, if I was a clever politician, I would say, okay, well, that's fine. Everybody's going to vote yes on roads. I really, really, really want to do central library for our libraries. I'll tell you later why we need one. And so, but we can't just put in Proposition 1 roads and a central library, because everybody's going to vote for roads, that way we can get our central library. State law keeps us and anybody else from doing that. So you have to, in fact, we work in consultation with the State Attorney General's office throughout the entire process to make sure we're lumping the right projects together on the right ballot items. So based on that legal advice, in consultation with the Attorney General, we ended up with 7 ballot items. And so Proposition 1 is transportation. You have a fair amount of leeway within each proposition, but you can't have parks and roads in the same, you can't have libraries and public safety, you can't have animal shelters stuck in with, for central libraries or things. So Proposition 1, 103, and so voters, by the way, you go to the ballot booth, and you vote yes or no on all 7. So it's essentially it's 7 individual, city bond propositions or bond elections. So if you vote, if you want to, hope you do, you'll vote 7 times, and hope you vote yes on all 7. But Prop 1, I'll look at this real quickly. Transportation, $103 million. 85 million of that is designated for street reconstruction, taking some crummy roads, completely reconstructing them, oftentimes expanding the capacity, not necessarily, but clearly, every time we do this around town, it expands the efficacy and the traffic flow of those roads. There's 120 different lane miles, that's 12 bridge and culvert improvement projects, $8 more million for traffic signals and signal synchronization at our traffic management center, $8.5 million for sidewalks that are desperately needed all over the city, and $2 million for bikeway projects to help complete the city's bikeway. So the Attorney General says that's fine. Those are all transportation projects. You can have road reconstruction, traffic signal synchronization, sidewalks, and bikeways, all on Prop 1, $103 million. Proposition 2 was a little bit trickier for us, but it's $145 million that on the ballot, I think, says drainage and water quality protection. Rich is still here. I don't see one of my little cheat sheets, but as I'm campaigning, I call it something slightly different. I think of this as water quality and flood control projects. But of the $145 million, it's $95 million for everything that I would look into is urban drainage. It's 71,000 lineal feet of new storm drains installed. It's not sexy stuff. It's stuff that cities need to do. And if you drive around town during maybe a 1-inch rainfall in this town, you'll see how poorly, especially our older urban neighborhoods, how poorly they drain because we have undersized, poorly constructed, maintained, antiquated storm sewer systems. Well, we're going to rebuild 71,000 lineal feet of that, 17,500 lineal feet of stream bank stabilization. Projects, we're actually gotten a lot better about aesthetic. Years ago, you just sort of used concrete, just channelized urban creeks, and now we have some great looking and very effective, environmentally friendly, sort of bank stabilization projects that we're doing around town. 17,000 more lineal feet of that. So a bunch of sort of urban drainage and flood control projects for $95 million. In addition to that, we have $50 million set aside to purchase more land, more open space protection. And we worked with the Attorney General, and ultimately he said, yes, that you can put those two together, as opposed to having a single ballot item for $50 million to buy land, open space. We, in fact, make the argument that it's legitimate, scientifically and otherwise, politically now, that by taking the right land, or being very strategic about it, and buying certain large swaths of land, and not having to develop, then that actually helps your downstream flooding problems. So if you're very good about it, you get several things from open space, environmental protection, air quality is improved, but you hopefully have the land that keeps from worsening your existing urban drainage problem. So $50 million for additional open space acquisition. And of course, we'll do this mostly in the Barton Springs recharge zone, and also be taken out helping on urban flooding. And Prop 3, $84 million for our Parks Department. That breaks out into $25 million for facilities, $18 million to redo all these pools that are just disastrous from an ongoing management standpoint, $10 million for parkland infrastructure. We got $500,000 to redo the Susanna Dickinson House, the Elizabeth Day Museum, and the Rosewood Park House, all park facilities, historic sort of museum type properties on parkland. $8.9 million for new North Austin Rec Center, $1.3 million for skate parks. Far and away the most utilized parks facility we built in the last 20 years is the Mabel Davis Skate Park we kind of constructed last year. You can't get in the place. There are so many kids down there. So $1.3 million for probably 3, maybe 4 additional skate parks. $10 million for additional parkland acquisition. And these are going to be specific infield pocket parking. Using GIS technology recently, we did this analysis. We wanted to see if we could find a way toward no single family home in Austin is further than 2 miles away from an actual usable park. There's parkland all over town that the dedicated parkland, there's not a playscape there. There's not really a place for kids to play. Interestingly enough, the big swath of town that has the fewest parks and the most number of homes further than 2 miles away from the park is relatively affluent Northwest Austin. And so we've very, very strategically, and using GIS technology, we've identified, where we can go in and buy, some existing vacant lots, where we can actually buy a couple of properties, maybe even demolish them, and create some infill parks in the city, so no home is further than 2 miles away from the park. So $10 million for infill parks, $5 million for greenway linkages on all our hike and bike trail system, and $5 million for just destination parks and natural areas. So that's Prop 3, park facilities and park. Prop 4 is shown here. These are on the ballot as community and cultural facilities. I consider Prop 4 to be an investment in our creative economy. And what this would be $31.5 million to expand the Zach Scott Theater, which is actually privately run but publicly owned on city parkland down at Lamar and Riverside. An African American heritage and cultural facility, an Asian American resource center, a $5 million investment in Washington Film Studios at the Dale Miller Airport, which has been a spectacular success for us as a local economy. Quick aside, so in 2000, the city was about to spend $500,000, actually had the contract, the demolition contract, came to the city council, spent $500,000 to demolish the rest of the hangars at the old airport, as we had been demolishing all the other buildings, the terminal and whatnot. And the Austin Film Society came to us quietly and said, what if we just have to use those hangars for a while? Just don't demolish them for a while. And so we voted not to spend $500,000. Instead, we ended up leasing it to the Film Society for $1 a year. And in the last 6 years, $125 million worth of films have been shot in these old hangars, and we were about to spend $500,000 of tax money to obliterate. Well, now with this, a $5 million investment directly into those facilities, we will air condition them, we will acoustically stabilize them, and you will see a dramatic return on that investment in this, great part of our creative economy here in this town. So just, should be a no-brain kind of investment in what has been a spectacular return on a lack of investment already to the city. The second phase of the Mexican American Cultural Center for $5 million and the Mexican Carti Museum for $5 million. So it's the cultural sort of arts facilities. There's also an investment in the Film Society. But I think of this as a creative economy investment, that the fundamental characteristic for our success as an economy. And right now, I promise you, Austin has the strongest metro economy in the country right now. Disproportionately is what many people call the creative class or the creative economy. It's how music and film and gaming are all sort of digitally and technologically. It's how attractive we are on performing the visual arts side. And some people don't make the direct connection, but I promise you that companies figure that out. And companies figure out that they will do better in towns that their workforce is doing better in, or they will find a better workforce, more educated, more creative workforce in towns like Austin than they will in other sort of seemingly peer cities. And so this is the smallest of the ballot items, $31.5 million, maybe long-term the most important, just to keep us moving forward in fueling what I think is a spectacular creative class and economy here in our county. Prop 5, first time ever, we are asking for general obligation debt to deal with what is a big growing issue in urban America, which is housing affordability. We have all cities have existing housing programs. We had 1933 in the New Deal. Most cities had housing authorities created. Austin Housing Authority is a board that High Point and been in place since the 30s, and they own 2 or 3 or 4 public housing projects, sort of classic template boilerplate product. Meanwhile, and that's been ongoing, we'll keep going. Meanwhile, we have Austin Housing Finance Corporation, where we usually use HUD block grant dollars to try to sort of co-invest with the private development community, or figure out how to have first-time home buyer assistance programs, just a series of tools in the housing affordability toolbox. But it's been limited, and it's just not nearly enough resources in order for us to truly try to have an impact on what is a growing crisis in this town. And that's housing affordability, and it's the old sort of wisdom or thinking was that it was the poorest in your community that, of course, had the big challenge of housing affordability. That's why housing authorities in the 30s were formed. That's why we own public housing projects. Right, using that term, that's what they are. We know what they look like, and perhaps seemingly how poorly they have served the poorest in our community. There's far more recognition now about the true housing affordability crisis. Is that when you have 60% of your population spending more than a third of their take-home pay on their housing, that's a problem, particularly as transportation costs continue to go up. And so for the first time, we're actually asking for general obligation debt, GO debt, Prop 5, to have a $55 million fund, pretty limited in the scheme of things, really. And if we have that $55 million, the plan would be to take 33 million of it and create a rental housing development program whereby we co-invest with the private, mostly multifamily development community in town to fundamentally buy down, to reduce their cost of delivering units. And of course, more of that public investment, then create an inventory scattered throughout the city, even scattered individually throughout individual development of more affordable units. And then $22 million for home ownership programs like the first-time down payment assistance, things like that. So Prop 5, $55 million housing affordability package. Prop 6 is the Central Library, $90 million. Sort of sticks out there like a sore thumb in some ways. And of all the ballot items, this one might be the most easily picked off by overburdened taxpayers or people who just sort of challenge why we might need a new library in the 21st century technology center like Austin. So the current central library we have was built in the 70s. Austin was 1/3 the size we are today. The library system had 8 branch libraries. And we and previous councils have made the sort of the policy decision over the last generation or so to expand our branch system. We now have 21 branch libraries, but you still have the same old central library serving as the nerve center. And so unfortunately, there's been too much thinking in this town when it comes to our library system that it's sort of either or. That you either sort of have a big, bold, well-done, hip-looking central library, or you decentralize and you scatter out into the neighborhoods and you have a bunch of branches. Well, we have done the latter. with 21 branch libraries all over the city. But we finally awakened to the fact that if you don't have a strong sort of nerve center, then your library system doesn't serve those neighborhoods well. And so, because fundamentally the central library is to some degree almost a warehousing function, as well as the tech and employee resource for all these branches. Well, so now it has shown. And so it shows both in the actual central library now, whereby every time we buy a book, we have to take a book off the shelf or put it there. Where all of our administrators and employees literally are working in the hallways and in the old broom closets sort of thing. And it's just not serving the rest of the system. Meanwhile, even in 21st century technology-driven American economy, it's somewhat counterintuitive, but with the advent of technology, there's far more use in libraries than ever before. Last year, Austin had 3.2 million citizen visits to our library. 3.2 million. So far, 5 times more than all the people who go to University of Texas football games for an entire season here on campus. It's pretty remarkable, really. 1 in 6 of those people go to our downtown library. It's quite reasonable to assume that with a new central library, there would be more than 1 million citizen visits just to the central library. Seattle, San Jose have built 2 spectacular central libraries, pretty advanced technology. In fact, the only 2 cities that statistically are more educated as a citizenry than Austin is Seattle and San Jose, of the 40 big cities in the U.S. Both of those cities have built in the last, say, 5 years, big, new, hundreds of thousands of square feet, a couple of $100 million, at least in San Jose's example, central library, and their usership of their library system has been up measurably by multiples, I think, over the same 5 years in San Jose. So it sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but fundamentally it's about having a better library system. It's about having the appropriate nerve center for what is a well-done, pretty renowned branch library system and perform effectively. Meanwhile, from an urban fabric standpoint, what we could do with a $90 million investment in a structure in our lower part of our downtown could be spectacular. The site I would like to place the central library, if the voters approve it, is the existing green water treatment plant down near the new city hall. It's actually 6.5 acres overlooking Town Lake and Shoal Creek. 6.5 acres that is, a derelict, undersized, poorly constructed, poorly maintained, our oldest and smallest water treatment plant in the city. I suggest that if we have voter approval for a $90 million central library, we go to the private sector, to planning departments in the University of Texas, and say, okay, here's what we got. We have 6.5 acres overlooking Town Lake and Shoal Creek that cut off the downtown grid. The Oasis Street, that could be a spectacular urbane north-south thoroughfare, the only street on the west side of downtown that could connect Town Lake all the way to and through West Campus, the old one goes all the way through. But it stops a block and a half short of Town Lake because it runs into the north end of the derelict, undersized, crummy industrial water treatment plant. So we have 6.5 acres, we have $90 million bucks. We have a broken downtown street grid that could be very easily, for the cost of $2 or $3 million, we could punch the Oasis Street down to Town Lake, to Chavez. We could then punch 2nd Street west to New Oasis, even bridge Shoal Creek, and go straight to the City Home Power Plant. It's about to be redone as a mixed-use, vibrant sort of urban node. And what would you like? What would you, private sector, what could you all do with that? My instinct is you come in and probably build 4,000 underground parking spaces. They could connect the grids. They could create 4 city blocks. With, one of them will be designated as a library site, but there's no capital view corridor, no height limitation, no historic structure, no alleys running through it. And then, you could put this, they could build a a central library. It can be wrapped in retail and restaurants and hotels and condos and office space and lots of private sector tax base that then perpetually continues to fund our general fund. So probably tens and tens of millions of dollars worth of capital gains for land sales, new central library, hopefully done in a spectacular aesthetic way like Seattle's library has been done. Create a bunch of jobs, create a lot of tax base, create a lot of vibrancy, actually build roads in our downtown for the first time in 167 years, create an urbane north-south thoroughfare that gets West Campus connected to Town Lake in a very sound way, and just have a spectacular success economically for our library system, for mobility, arguably for environmental protection. Shoal Creek right there is the worst of the whole stretch of the creek, completely redo that. And so I just think it's a spectacular opportunity in addition to, I think, addressing what needs to be addressed, which is a great library system in a town that Barnes & Noble say we buy more books per capita than any city in the U.S. We're essentially as educated and as literate as any city in the country, and we don't have a library system that even begins to reflect that. So, in Prop 7, public safety and public health, the notes here. Obviously, as we continue to grow as a city and population, we make the policy decision to keep up with that from a policing standpoint, from fire protection, for EMS. So in this Prop 7, $58.1 billion proposition is a Northeast Police Substation, a new EMS station, a new municipal courthouse, which is desperately needed, a new animal shelter. So we lump, the Attorney General let us lump public safety and public health together. The animal shelter down on Town Lake, if you've ever been there, it's miserably pathetic. It's actually in the floodplain. And every time it rains more than about an inch and a half, we send 100 volunteers down there in rubber boots, and they have to pick up all the dogs because when it rains more than an inch and a half, about 8 inches of water rises in the outdoor cages where the dogs are. So every time it rains, we have 100 people down there with rubber boots carrying, wet, whimpering dogs up the railroad tracks. So we have to walk up the railroad tracks, get out of the floodplain, and you stand there for a few hours, then the water speeds, and you go back and get the dogs back. I mean, disaster is a public health issue, if nothing else, but of course, inconvenient and just poorly done. And so, call me radical, perhaps have an animal shelter not in the floodplain for about $12 million, and a $20 million joint training facility, whereby we chip in and start having a lot more economies of scale and cost-efficient training facilities for police, fire, EMS, not only for the city of Austin, but then likely for Travis County and some of the adjoining cities. So, 7 props. 1, transportation. 2, urban drainage and water quality protection. 3, parkland and park facilities. 4, community and cultural facilities. 5, affordable housing. 6, central library. 7, public safety and health facilities. Totaling $567 million. So quickly, the cost. So, we did all of that, and all the consultants running all the numbers, and the cost, if all 7 of these bond propositions pass, for the average home, the statistically average homeowner in Austin, I haven't found that person yet, but he or she's out there somewhere, would be $49 a year, 1.8 cents per $100 in valuation increase. If you go to yourself, a tax increase. So we'll go from 42 cents and change to about 44 cents per $100 in valuation. $49 a year, $4 a month. For us Aggies, that's a Shiner bottle that broke his boat once a month. For the rest of y'all, that's a Mocha Frappuccino once a month. So for $4 a month, we as a community will invest $567 million, really over a 5 or 6 year period. But they don't all happen at once. In fact, we couldn't sell all these bonds on Wall Street at one time if we wanted to. We would sell them in increments of probably $80 or $90 million each year, or twice a year at most. So for $4 a month, on the average homeowner in Austin, we invest in this very broad, but very balanced, I think very judicious and very affordable bond package. You look at the list, the laundry list: transportation, urban drainage, water quality, central libraries, animal shelters, all these things. They seem to be so independent, so so diverse, but I think they are precisely what Austin is. It's they seem independent, but in fact they're very interdependent. And just like Austin, I think, is this collection of unique sort of perspectives that fundamentally create a whole that's far more valuable than the sum of its parts. And so I'm suggesting that by voting yes on all 7 of these bond propositions, you're doing that. If transportation is your deal, just fix the traffic, I don't give a care about anything else. Well, don't vote yes on Prop 1 and no on anything else, thinking that somehow transportation is going to be better and the quality of life and also continues to move forward is going to be better. And then conversely, the same thing for folks who just want a central library or just want to focus on our renowned parks department. If you do that at the expense of transportation or urban drainage, then you still don't get there. And so it's this broad, balanced, I think judicious, and I think very affordable, very important series of investments that we want to continue to move forward as a city we are. So I promise you right now, Austin is the envy of this country. We have perhaps the strongest metro economy in the country right now. We're essentially the youngest, most educated, safest big city in the country. We have a spectacular asset of University of Texas in our urban core, with a state capital, a state of 25 million people. We have this vibrant private sector urban core that exists in the country, and it's just getting better. What's happening downtown right now is the envy of virtually every city and every area of the country right now. It's our citizenry. And so National Geographic Traveler comes out tomorrow. I got an advance copy last week. They rated 94 cities worldwide for different things and announced different cities being the best for different things. On the cover is Austin, Texas, as the best city in America. This phenomenal 10-page spread. In the last 6 months, Money, Forbes, and Fortune have named Austin number 1, 2, or 3 as best places to live, work, or play, begin a business, or start your career. Hispanic Magazine last month, the second year running, named Austin, Texas, the number 1 city in the country for Hispanics, ranking us over Miami and San Diego, San Antonio, and Puerto cities. Newsweek named us the second best city in North America to live, or you want to live or protest. Movie Maker Magazine just named Austin the number 1 city on the planet in which to film an independent movie, which means you don't have any money. So I hope you'll feel that, or you're here in part because of some of that. But fundamentally, the dynamics in this town could not be better. We truly are the envy of the country in many, many ways. But we won't continue to be if we don't invest in this. And this is everything from visual performing arts, it's everything from our urban fabric, it's everything from mobility to environmental protection to outdoor recreation. And that's what this package is about. So I'm asking people all over town to please vote yes on all 7, recognizing that you probably have some individual advocacy points in there that you feel far more passionate about than others. But don't disregard the others at the expense. Don't focus on yours at the expense of these others. So, sorry, I spoke way too long. I only got a few more minutes before I have to run out. I thought I'd open up for a few questions. So thank you all very much for having me.
So $49 a year doesn't sound like very much. I was surprised it was that little. But in communities like East Austin that are being hit by increasing property taxes, I don't know I haven't seen the numbers on what the total amount per year people are being hit with, but I know that there's a lot of concern about it. How would homeowners in East Austin be affected in the long term, both through the increasing property taxes from this and through the affordability measures included? Because it seems like sounded like it was more for first-time homeowners or rental units. And I know they're proposing a TIF funding pattern in the East Austin Preservation District. And I was wondering if the bond measure goes for affordable housing, if that would decrease the likelihood that that would be adopted by the city?
Well, one is obviously the affordability issue, disproportionately East Austin, and the whole sort of base concept of gentrification is this broad, complex, staggering challenge in many ways for us. There's absolutely no competing interest between the Proposition 5, and somehow if we get Proposition 5 passed, the city's not going to lower its bar in any way when it comes to what's happening really all over the city, but disproportionately East Austin when it comes to the housing affordability issue, particularly for long-time residents over there. So there's no conflict between the two. In fact, why not have more tools in the toolbox as we try to deal with what is a complicated challenge? We can do an entire, class semester on trying to sort of analyze the fundamental dynamics of what we generally refer to as gentrification, and you then do the analysis. Okay, so your economy is growing, so in theory, as commercial tax base is built, and it's happening all over town, and commercial valuation rises a lot faster than residential valuations during a boom economy, during a buzz economy, home prices, valuations stay high, and then your commercial valuations plummet, and that puts all the pressure of taxes, which you have one tax rate, one general fund, all commingled. And so when you have lowering commercial tax valuation, then the burden gets shifted over to homeowners. And so then there's this whole analysis, okay, so as your economy grows, and so the commercial valuations start to relieve the pressure on residential valuations, the same tax rate, does that perhaps offset that, that lack of pressure, does that perhaps offset the fact that the growing economy likely is then also fueling the pressure on well-located neighborhoods like Central East Austin? So it's this complicated do loop that you get in as we try to analyze sort of the pros of gentrification, by the way. Why not diversify the neighborhood economically? We say we want to diversify neighborhoods economically. Why not do it economically? Well, if you do it economically, then all of a sudden, because we fund local government services on the backs of property owners, then somebody's cost of local government goes up even though they didn't call 911 more frequently or didn't use our library system more frequently. Their cost of local government goes up because the neighborhood is being economically diversified and probably more expensive housing. So it's a complicated issue, but not voting for Prop 5 is certainly isn't going to help us try to deal with the broad issue of gentrification and housing. Got more questions? Sorry. Yes, sir.
Thanks for taking time today to come talk to us about this very attractive bond package that, as you said, is very far-reaching and interrelated. Is this a good springboard for Austin to return to comprehensive planning?
Return to
Comprehensive planning.
Well, I like to think that this bond package actually is a direct result, at least the makeup of the bond package is a direct result from our Vision Central Texas exercise that we went through 2002 through 2004. In fact, I was referring to this as the ECT bond package, and that we got so much citizen feedback from that exercise. 12,000 individual citizen surveys were filled out, and it was seemingly it was a land use issue, the whole exercise. Some sort of density versus transportation and environmental protection, but so much of the feedback we got from those 12,000 surveys talked about housing affordability and talked about access to health care, talked about educational systems, and so and transportation options, things like that. And so I think in many ways this bond ballot is a result of the ECT planning exercise. And but if these 7 pass, the good news is that sort of forces a bunch of good planning to occur to figure out, how to judiciously decide when these investments are made, figure out, where exactly how the central library is done, figure out, which of these road projects, road reconstruction projects occur, figure out which are the priorities of our bike plan, to invest the first $2 million in, that kind of thing. So I think it can definitely create, the call for additional land. Yeah.
You talked about how favored a city we are in the eyes. Does that give us kind of clout to say no to Marriott when it comes to places? Like, we just tell Marriott to take their development elsewhere, and somebody who's more interested in what we're interested in terms of keeping local establishments development?
Well, we don't need the cloud to tell Marriott no. And we don't, commercial tax base is an important, part of the puzzle. And those jobs that we created are an important part of the puzzle as well. What we don't have the cloud to do is to force a landowner to renew a lease. And so we won't be in the business of making the Finley family who's owned that land for 70 years and seen mayors and councils come and go, and they're going to own it for 74 years and watch me go. We can't force them to reduce somebody's lease when a contractual lease expires. So it's, so inevitably it's a lot more nuanced than clout. In that specific case, I'm quite optimistic that there's an alternative that's soon to be announced that the Perez sisters like, that Soros likes, saying child care center and AIC will like, and then ultimately a project occurs there, but it's also frankly a better looking project than was initially shown to us. But it's just not as simple as, use the cloud. The good news is, Austin is so attractive right now that, that as companies come here or as developers approach us with a project, they would much rather have, our support than try to do it without us. And what's happening is still not the perfect project, but what's happening West Campus with our University of Neighborhood Overlay, or UNO, it's a voluntary opt-in development scheme is what it is. And so if developers come in and do what we ask them to do on the streetscape and on the first floor of a structure, then we give them a little more height, we give them more sort of density bonus essentially, and everybody's opting in. In fact, it sort of makes me think, well, we should let's ask a little bit more because no one's telling us no right now. And so it's that kind of stuff. And so most people like investing in also right now. I think it's a good sound investment. And so in order to get that investment, we're saying here's what we'd like you to do. And because in the scheme of things, we don't have that much policing authority over much of your urban fabric. As a planner, I wish we had more direct authority. It's relatively limited in the scheme of things. So that actually we have much no control over. But we get people to opt into certain plans and have, and for that, we help them even more. So there's going to be a lot more nuance than trying to, get somebody over there. So one more question. I got to run. Yes, sir.
Hi, Mayor. Nice to meet you in person. I have a question on the distribution of funds for these proposals. Approximately what percentage in a number of the money is being spent east of 535 and west of 535?
Believe it or not, we actually go through that analysis, and we have, obviously, just historically, one could figure out that for decades there was, sort of sinful lack of investment in certain parts of town, disproportionately East Austin. When you go back, we do this analysis about every 2 or 3 years. When you go back and look at the bond dollars spent since, say, 1975, it's disproportionately, frankly, in East Austin. The fact that 78702 now has 3 branch libraries, and 78701 still just has 1, is a part of that. The irony is that as we have built, senior centers, rec centers, branch libraries, museums, much better, sort of infrastructure from drainage and whatnot in East Austin. The irony, of course, is that has fueled a lot more people saying, this is a pretty nice part of town. It's 5 minutes from downtown. We got mature trees, big lots. here I am. And so here this other, sort of piece of this ironic puzzle is that as we have disproportionately invested bond dollars in parts of town where we hadn't for 100 years or more, that sort of fuels the attractiveness of the neighborhood. And there's some great stuff happening in East Austin. From a public standpoint, investment standpoint. But then you look up and you see inevitably that people, attractive cities attract people, and attractive parts of cities, attract people even more. And I think you're going to see a lot of changes in East Austin. Hopefully not at the expense of folks who have been there, want to stay there. The good news is when you really look at East Austin, or satellite imagery, there is so much vacant land. There's so much because of past sort of neglect and just bad public policy. A bunch of old brownfield sites, the industrial land over there. And so the hope is that as we try to relieve the pressure on housing by delivering more housing, stopping housing isn't going to take pressure off of the existing housing stock. It will worsen it. If we are judicious and get more housing units built, but not displacing existing homes, then perhaps that takes some of the pressure off of the existing housing stock over there. But there's lots of room in East Austin geographically. What we have to figure out is there room sort of politically and emotionally for stuff to occur that's going to be very, very hard to stop in a capitalist free society. But we specifically do, in fact, there's probably federal law on that now. We actually do, geographic analysis of where the money is spent. And I think there's, certain, in fact, I know that there are certain federal legislations that would enable somebody to challenge public spending if, in fact, it's shown to be, disproportionately beneficial to some folks or some parts of town, not everybody.
So I do a ballpark figure on a number of percentage of your side.
Yes, I just know that.
I'll be accurate.
Well, my instinct is it's at least proportionate. And so, based on how you define East Austin, some people, go to 290 all the way down to 71. But my instinct is we were very judicious about moving it proportionately to at least the population. So if there's, pick a number, if there's 185,000 people that live in what I would call East Austin, and that's 28% of the city's population, my instinct is we can show that approximately 28% of these bond dollars will be spent in a beneficial way to that geographic area.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry, I do got to run. So thank you all very much.